as it goes on. If you have any questions at any time, you are more than welcome to put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we will get to you. So the first thing on the agenda for this meeting is to approve the minutes of the last meeting, which were sent to you in an email earlier this week. Are there any objections to the minutes?
I didn't get any email.
Okay. Did you just get elected in the midterms?
Yep, I just got elected in the midterms.
Okay, that's why you're not on our email yet. So you will start getting the emails very soon.
Got it.
But I had to turn all of the things into Google Docs again because I tried to send them as Word documents, and it said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And then I tried to send them as PDFs, and it said, once again, you're not allowed to do that. So I can send a link as soon as I find it that has the minutes in it. So any objections to the minutes as written? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. Our next order of business is to swear in our new members, which is done by one of our advisors. I'm going to go ahead and share the oath, and then I will turn it over to Jen to do the actual swearing in. As soon as there we go. All right, Jen, whenever you're ready.
For some reason, I don't see it on my screen.
Does anybody see it on their screen?
It just says you've started.
Oh, there we
we go.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, excellent.
Yep. Okay. So I request that one of you unmute yourself so I'm not, I can hear the feedback of someone repeating it.
Got it.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, please raise your right hand and repeat after me the oath of office. In the presence of honored guests and members here assembled.
In the presence of honored guests and members assembled here.
I do solemnly promise and pledge.
I do solemnly promise and pledge.
That I will faithfully execute the duties of the Assembly.
That I will faithfully execute the duties of the Assembly.
As a program representative of the Graduate Student Government.
As a program representative of the Graduate Student Government.
To the best of my knowledge and ability.
To the best of my knowledge and ability.
To commit myself to the Student Government's Code of Ethics.
To commit myself to the Student Government's Code of Ethics.
Further the objectives of the Student Government.
Further the objectives of the Student Government.
To serve my fellow graduate student community.
To serve my fellow graduate student community.
Through engagement with my constituents.
Through engagement with my constituents.
And voting according to the preferences of my constituent body.
And voting according to the preferences of my constituent body.
By the authority vested in me by the Graduate Student Government, I now proclaim you duly installed as program representatives and voting members of the Graduate Student Government Assembly. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, excellent. So welcome to all of our new members. Hopefully you will find this experience to be fulfilling and you will be able to make a difference for graduate students across the campus. The next item on the agenda is some old business, which is a piece of legislation from our last meeting that we tabled, but has now been reintroduced. You have a version of it, or many of you do. Let me actually, okay, let's try not to do 4 things at once. That is in Google Doc format. which is not entirely formatted correctly because, again, for some reason, I can't send Word documents. And if you don't have it, there it is. I'm also going to share the version that I am working on so that everyone can see what we are talking about. And I will turn it over to the authors and sponsors of the resolution to introduce it. So either Autumn or Misty or.
Okay, I'm here this time, guys, and not trying to multitask for once. I'm Autumn Perky, I'm from GVBT. So kind of the background about this, about why Misty helped me work on this, is I was a survivor of domestic violence. I came to the University of Maryland as a way to restart my life. I didn't make a lot of money, and I applied for everything you can imagine. I applied for Head Start. I was put on a wait list. I called the CYC, which is the local child care center on campus, and I told them my situation. I'm like, I have 2 kids. I want to get them in care. And I was like, well, what about just 1 kid? And they basically were like, don't even bother because you're not going to get off the wait list. And I did some more digging and I sent some information to Simon, but basically I was in a really bad situation and it was very difficult for me. So I took out loans to pay for private daycare. Well, now things are better. Luckily, year 2, I started to learn the situation, but I never wanted anyone else to try to go through what I went through if they're trying to survive as a graduate student parent. So Misty and I put this together and I've kind of looked into like the differences between universities. I know Valerie's on here and she probably has experience with Penn State. I was an undergrad at Ohio State, so I have personal background in there. I'd hoped to stay at Ohio State, but I came here. I also was accepted to the Syracuse University, so I have background in knowing what their program was like, which was something I took into account when I decided what program to go to. And we kind of looked around at what the university had, and then I gave Simon some more information that isn't included on here about the CYC. And the CYC used to have a sliding scale for graduate students, but the institution pulled funding away from them. So they no longer have that for graduate students either. So hopefully that's enough background on this. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Tamara.
I guess point of information, what do you mean by a sliding scale? What did that look like for graduate students?
As a sliding scale, that meant that the cost of childcare at the CYC was reduced compared to what faculty paid. Because the institution pulled that funding, they can no longer offer that to graduate students, and the CYC operates only on funding to pay the assistant director and the director's salaries now.
Do you know if it was based on like graduate student salary specifically, or if it was just like a reduced rate across the board?
It was supposed to be based off our salaries from what I understand.
Thank you.
Valerie.
So Valerie Hall, Anthropology. First, I want to express again my support for this bill because, as Autumn mentioned, we've talked a bit about this. My family was in a similar situation when my husband was attending Penn State. We didn't have a whole lot of money. The sliding pay scale, which Penn State had, and the subsidies made all the difference for my family. And I think it's appalling that as an institution that prides itself as being a Big Ten R1 peer institution of some of the universities mentioned, similar support structures aren't in place for students. The second comment that I have is for the authors of the bill. I was wondering if we could potentially amend the bill to read, instead of students who have children, read students who parent children, because not everyone who has guardianship of a child necessarily is their biological parent. So there are just a couple of places where changing a word here or there maybe would make the language a little more inclusive.
Okay. So let's take that as a motion to amend. Let me. And we don't necessarily have to catch every little bit right now. If we wanted to say that in general we want to replace that, then we can approve it contingent on that sort of replacement, just so that we to change it from graduate students who have children to graduate students who parent children.
Yeah, so for that one, it would read both current and potential graduate students parent children. And then in the next clause down, towards the end, it would say graduate students who parent children instead of with children, along those lines.
Line 17.
17, excellent. Graduate students.
And then the last one that I saw would be on the next page. It would be line 41.
Are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, we'll approve the amendment with unanimous consent. Laura McBride.
Laura McBride, chemistry. I would just like to say that I really support this amendment, and I think it really needs to be brought to the university's attention that this is a problem for graduate students. The one thing I have is some slight formatting. I noticed that the footnotes, which I think are really good to include, there's 2 number 4s. So Penn State is 4 and UC Berkeley is 4, but they're different websites. So the footnotes probably need to be renumbered.
That is entirely true. And since Microsoft does the footnotes automatically, I'm not sure how it happened.
Yeah, and then the only other comment I had was to move the footnotes before the commas
Okay.
in that same line. But that's just my formatting things. But I really support this resolution.
Great. Are there any objections to those formatting changes? Autumn?
No objections to the formatting changes, but line 9, you missed, it says students parent instead of students who parent for the previous amendment.
I think that's correct, though. Both current and potential graduate students parent children, so they carry out the act of parenting. I could be wrong. I'm not a grammarian by any stretch of the imagination, so somebody please correct me. Okay, we will make those changes, Laura, since there's no objection to that. I'm not going to try to do it right now and fight with Microsoft Word about how it's numbering these things in case we lose some information, but we'll assume that those changes are made. Other questions, comments, concerns? So I will say we brought this issue up as promised to the graduate school at the executive board meeting with the graduate school yesterday. They don't really have any issue with the resolution. They're happy to sort of explore a bunch of these things. They do think that we have directed it to the wrong office, and that rather than the Office of Graduate Diversity and Inclusion, it should go to University Human Resources. And those are the correct people to sort of make these to sort of make this choice. Obviously, what the graduate school thinks we should do and who they think are correct doesn't have to be who we think are correct. But I just wanted to throw that out there and get the reaction of the assembly to changing the request of the Office of Graduate Diversity Inclusion to University Human Resources. Tamara.
I guess my question is, like, what are the benefits of one over the other? Why did they think that the Office of Human Resources was a better fit than the Office of Diversity and Inclusion? Did they provide any insight there?
So they said University Human Resources actually has a committee that deals particularly with this issue. And so letting that committee know that this is our issue, and they just thought that this wasn't really what graduate ODI does. Blessing, do you want to weigh in on this because you were part of that meeting?
Hi, yeah. So this is just not in the purview of the Office of Graduate Diversity and Inclusion, which is part of the graduate school. Now, you might want to think about sending it to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, which is the university level diversity office. But really, all things childcare, elder care, really do fall under UHR, which is the University Human Resources. So you might want to think about sending to both. But the Office of Graduate Diversity and Inclusion is just not the appropriate office because this is not in their purview at all.
Autumn?
I second what Blessing and Nestor have said, and I would like to suggest, and I'm bad at the language, I apologize, but I think it's a motion to amend to change who we're sending it to and do the University Diversity and Inclusion and then University Human Resources.
Okay, so that would be this and we would also make that change. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Yes. Our intrepid Diamondback reporter is correcting my grammar in the chat, so thank you to Kushbu for that. Are there any objections to the amendment? Kelsey, is that an objection to the amendment? I don't think so, because I think your hand was up.
No,
before.
my hand was up before. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No
cool,
objection.
cool. All right, then without objection, that amendment is agreed to. Then Kelsey.
Hi, Kelsey Dutta, Electrical Engineering. I wanted to bring up the point. I'm not sure if this is worth adding a whereas, but I know there's at least one public high school in PG County that provides, I think, free daycare for children of the high school students to help them not drop out. So since the state of Maryland insists on calling us students and not employees, it might be a good point to include that even students get subsidized or free childcare. Obviously, like the public school system is separate from the University of Maryland, but I don't know, it feels like a relevant thing to perhaps include. I don't want to delay this resolution by, I'm not sure how to proceed, but it felt like a relevant point.
Autumn?
Autumn, GVPT, I want to respond to Kelsey. I think that's a great point. I have concerns, and I think Simon can weigh in on this, since the Collective Bargaining Act is going before the Budget and Finance Committee next week. So that's my only response to that.
You know, I don't know that it would have that much of an impact on those claims. To me, it's sort of an even if statement. You know, either we're employees and therefore we should get the same, you know, sort of benefits as employees, or we're students and we should also get the same benefits as other students in the University of Maryland. I think it's a reasonable argument that we could make if that's what the Assembly wants. I don't think it would impact our collective bargaining stand very much at all. Tamara.
I guess one concern I have with including that is that if this is just one high school that's offering this to students, I think, you know, that might be an exception, which like good for that high school, like that's awesome. But unfortunately, if not all high schools are offering it, it's hard to like make the argument on the fact that this is just like a general thing that's available to students, if that makes sense.
Valerie.
Valerie Hall, Anthropology. I agree with what Kelsey was saying about not wanting to delay this any further because it's important and we've already delayed a month. But I'm also wondering about whether there should be language included in the bill about how this probably disproportionately affects female students or female presenting students because childcare duties just always tend to fall on females more than males. And that might tie in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion in a way that maybe the bill as written doesn't at the moment.
You, Dr. Computer Science, I know at least a lot of grad students I know, it's exactly the opposite, where some people I know, the husband of a two-parent household is in grad school and therefore has a more flexible schedule and there ends up being more responsible for the childcare. As opposed to the, in these situations, the wife has a 9-to-5 job, just as an example.
And that's actually a very good call out because that's what happened in my household when my husband was in grad school and I was working. So yeah.
Autumn.
Autumn Perky, GVBT. Yehuda, thank you. You make a really good point, and I think that's really important. I think one of the things to think about is there utility in having a whereas about females because of the diversity and inclusion aspect. And I think what we're trying to do with this resolution is get attention to this problem and what it means. And if there's a utility in doing so, then we should do so and should consider doing so. If there's not a utility and it doesn't matter if this is a diversity issue, then don't do it. But that's just an opinion.
Laura.
Laura McBride, Chemistry. I think this resolution already has a diversity element to it because graduate students with parents are not the norm. And so I think addressing that issue already calls in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. So I don't think we necessarily need a whereas specifically about females, but if other people feel differently, that's fine.
Misty.
Yes, I support Laura's view on this. I think that the whereas that says, it undermines the retention and recruitment of a diverse graduate student body speaks to all of the issues that have been highlighted. And it's also part of the reason I'm just, maybe it's not appropriate, but I am curious as to why the Graduate School Office of Diversity and Inclusion wouldn't be able to help be an advocate on behalf of graduate students about this issue, because it is an issue of diversity and inclusion that is affecting graduate students. So do they just not have, I'm just kind of curious about how it can just be decided that, well, that's just not what the Graduate School Diversity and Inclusion Office does, if it is clearly a diversity and inclusion issue that is impacting graduate student retention and recruitment.
So the office is an office of one. So this is one individual who does recruitment and retention programming for graduate students, particularly recruitment. So it just seems that an office that has more staffing would be able to take this on. You feel free to address it to, maybe send a copy of the resolution to Christopher Perez as well. And I can always give him the heads up that this might be coming down the pipeline. But in terms of the authority to make any changes, and the bandwidth, to be honest, I just think that sending it to a larger office that has that authority would be more efficient for you all.
Great. Thanks, Blessing. That's super helpful. Maybe our next resolution is that we should hire some more folks in the Office of
Sure,
Graduate
I will
Diversity and
co-sponsor that.
If that's yeah. Laura McBride.
If there's no objections, motion to vote.
There's a
And I
motion to
forget
vote.
exactly what we're voting on. Is it this amendment or the whole resolution?
So the amendments have all been passed by unanimous consent.
Okay,
So
then
the
I've-
amendments are in. So we're on the just bill overall now. So there is a motion to vote. Is there a second?
Seconded.
The motion has been heard and seconded. Is there any objection to moving to vote on the resolution GSG A40 R07? No objection being seen. We will open up voting on GSG A40 R07. Edie, if you would make the poll go. And we'll leave it open for 30 seconds. That is our general amount of time that you have to vote on things that we have polls for.
In the gap here, I just want to mention in the chat, Valerie, you mentioned Dr. Perlow, VP of Student Affairs. I've already been chatting with her about this issue and will continue to do so. So even though it's not necessarily included in the resolution, it'll definitely be brought to her attention. So I just wanted to mention that.
Great, thank you.
All right, and as voting expires, the yeses are 37, the noes are 0, and the abstentions are 0. The bill is agreed to. All right. Yehuda.
Yehuda Katz, computer science and former parliamentarian. So in general, even if a resolution addresses a particular person, once we've passed a resolution, it can be disposed of in whatever way is appropriate to further the aims agreed to in the resolution. So even if it names a particular person or particular department, any resolution, you could make 1,000 copies and put one in slip one under the door of every administrator on campus. You might get a lot of people saying, hey, what are you doing at my office? But if that furthers the resolution, that's appropriate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's definitely true. Thanks, Yehuda. Okay. New member here. How do I resolution to the floor? So that's a great question. Let me actually go over that real quick for the new members, since we just did some old business. So resolutions go through the Rules Committee, which is a committee that I chair. We just make sure that all of the resolutions in the right format and all that stuff. If you have an issue that you would like to raise, by all means, email me. I can help you write a resolution that gets put in the correct format and uses, the way that we really want to talk about it. I'm happy to do that. And then so it goes to the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee puts it on the agenda for the meetings. And at that point, it can be debated at the meeting. If you have an issue that you would like to raise before you've got a formal resolution on it, we have time at the end of each meeting, which is called Representatives Forum, which is basically an open forum where any representative can raise any issue and ask questions about it, or just let people know that it's something that they would like to work on in the future. So we should have quite a bit of Representatives Forum today. So if you've got an issue, we're happy to talk about it then. But next on the agenda is a special election for a new committee chair. Unfortunately, one of our committee chairs had to resign because they simply had other things going on. And so we are in search of a new committee chair for the Local and Civic Engagement Committee. This committee deals with the city of College Park and the PG and Montgomery counties, specifically to advocate for issues for graduate students that are at a very local level, things like housing and all sorts of things that local governments deal with more than state governments or the federal government, which is what the Legislative Affairs Committee is a little bit more focused on. With that said, we will look for nominations. You are, of course, allowed to nominate yourself or volunteer yourself if you don't want to use. Sometimes people get weird about using the "I nominate myself." Just volunteer to be the new chair of the Local and Civic Engagement Committee. Daniel.
Yes, Daniel Smoliak, computer science. I'd like to volunteer myself for the chair of the committee.
All right, we have one nomination. Is there anyone else? Any other nominations? Seeing none, we will now hold an election. I'll just ask unanimous consent that the assembly name Daniel as the new chair of the Local and Civic Engagement Committee. Hearing no objections, congratulations, Daniel, and welcome to the realm of committee chairs. Gianna will contact you soon.
Awesome, thank you.
Excellent. As I promised, we have lots of time for representatives forum today. So any issues that you have can be raised here. I'm gonna start us off with an issue that was raised at a graduate council meeting a little while ago. The university is looking at creating a new policy in terms of payment for graduate students that would allow, so right now, if you have the same job as someone else in your department, there are only 3 steps that you can be at: first year student, past first year student, and student with a master's degree who is past their first year. Some departments would like more flexibility in terms of paying some graduate students in their department more than other graduate students in their department. The reasons that were raised were that some of them are on grants, and so those grants can afford to pay those folks more, as opposed to the university's general fund, or the department's general fund being used to pay for them. And just whether or not the job you're doing is really comparable. You're a TA if you're an instructor of record sometimes, those sorts of things. I didn't have a strong sense. I have to think about this a lot more before I know what my opinion is on it, but I wanted to raise that because we know that that's going to be talked about the next time the graduate council meets. And so obviously that's something that we should know your opinions on. So Tamara.
Hi, Tamara. It's like I keep forgetting to save my program. So I guess there are 2 things that are coming to my mind when I'm hearing this. One, is the university going to come up with some kind of guidelines as to like what these different pay scale opportunities are? Because I could see that if it's too flexible, it could kind of open the doors to discrimination and I don't know, some other issues. That said, I think that generally allowing the departments to have more flexibility with how much they give graduate students is probably a good thing, because it might be capping grad student salaries that don't need to be capped. So,
Rob.
I just have a quick, Rob Delka, physics. Do we know what departments are advocating for this change in policy? And yeah.
Dan, I don't remember if they said specifically at the meeting. You were also there.
Yeah, I don't think they did either. If I had taken better notes, I probably could have had the names of the people maybe, but I don't have that. But that's probably fairly easy to find out, or at the next council, you can just ask. I might also, Jen, do you happen to know? We can keep asking down the line of people that were there.
Unfortunately, I don't recall.
I don't think they said at the meeting, so not sure. Yehuda.
Yehuda Katz, computer science. So what each person who works for or is paid by the university gets paid is public information. It's actually easier to get it from the Baltimore Sun website than it is to get it from Diamondback, but all that's public. So that should help with pay disparity issues. Now, as a grad student who takes on-call shifts, I would love for that to pay me more. And I don't think my department's on the list, but if that was an option available through departments, I would ask my supervisor for that ability. I guess, as I said, since I have on-call shifts, which is not standard work, and I'm sure there are lots of other people that applies to, whether you're in a lab with animals, for example, or time-sensitive things. I don't know who else it applies to, but I think I could see only benefits.
Okay. Autumn?
Autumn Perky, GVBT. So my department is one of the lower ends on GA salaries. We start off around 17,500, so very painful. But thinking about this and the implications of this, I know at Ohio State, where I'm from, RAs are paid more. Like I know RAs who make $30,000 a year in political science versus the TAs who make less. In my department, I do take work overloads. I am paid the same for a TA ship overload as I am for an RA ship. So, and I'm going to contextualize this into an example. A RA ship outside of my department would have paid me $8 more per hour than my current RA overload. Thank you.
That was an issue that was brought up, that there's already disparity across campus, so it doesn't matter how much the disparity is inside departments. I don't know. Laura.
Laura McBride, chemistry. Autumn, thank you for giving us that information. And another reason why we need collective bargaining, because in the chemistry department, this minimum starting, if you're a TA or RA, is like a lot higher, and there should not be that disparity across departments. I kind of second what Tamara was saying, that I think I'd be really interested to know if the graduate school or the university decides to do this, does every department have to do it, or departments opt in? How do they define these different structures? How do they choose that grad students qualify? Is that set by the university or the graduate school? Do departments determine that? And so I feel like as more comes about, I'd love to hear kind of more, because I am worried that there could be discrimination if it's the departments or it's on an individual, like case by case basis, versus it's just like you pass this milestone, you go up, you pass this milestone, as it kind of is now. And so those are sort of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I can sort of answer one of those questions, which is that the graduate school sets a minimum that you are allowed to pay someone, but other than that, doesn't really. Departments are given, and it's got this 3-step system, but what those steps are and how that works is, how much money is really a department decision. Blessing.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify a point just in case, just based on the questions, I'm not sure if people are super clear, but as Simon mentioned, the graduate school sets the minimum requirement for each step. But the question at hand is, can departments pay different forms of assistantships, different payment? Because right now, all RAs and TAs and administrative assistants in the same step in a department are supposed to be paid the same amount. What they're asking is if, for example, we can pay RAs more than we pay TAs within the same step. So just to be clear.
Yeah.
And if you have questions, I can clarify more.
Great, thank you, Blessing. Valerie.
Given that information, I would definitely be in support of this. I know there have been situations in my department where a professor has a grant and is restricted in what they can do with that funding because of some of these graduate school requirements. So I think faculty in that situation might be very interested in this type of a change. And also I can see, you know, I'm coming in with 10 years of experience in the field. Does that mean I can get paid more than somebody coming in with no experience that is kind of learning as they go? There's some differential experiences there as well. Although I absolutely understand some of the concerns around inclusion as well. So.
Kelsey?
Hi, Kelsey, electrical engineering. I definitely agree with people who mentioned that this can lead to more discrimination, but I think that there are ways in which it could reduce the effects of other inequalities. For example, I've been paid significantly more than other people in my step because I've gotten independent fellowships before, but a lot of fellowships are only available to US citizens. And so people who are not US citizens are not able to apply for these like lucrative fellowships and grants. And so they're kind of just stuck on whatever level they're stuck on, in addition to, you know, not being able to take on extra jobs, but that's a separate issue. So I think this could be a way for, I don't know, if it's departments or PIs or whoever to sort of reward exceptional students that aren't able to get additional funding through the usual means.
Okay. Tamara?
So I guess I had this like developing issue that's coming out of this in my head. And while I support a lot of what's been said in favor of this, there's something about like the idea that research assistants can get paid more when being a teaching assistant is, like just from my personal experience, much more difficult. Not just the work itself, it's that you're still doing the research and now you're not getting paid for it, and also you're being a teaching assistant. That being said, I understand that it probably comes from, you know, a place of like what's possible, like, well, we can pay research assistants more, but maybe like the bigger fight is we should just pay grad students more in general, not just research assistants.
Yeah, I will say that that probably varies in terms of what the research assistantship is and the teaching assistantship. That's probably, yeah. Anyway. Misty.
Yeah, so building on what Tamara just said, you know, I'm in a field where we pretty much are all on TA ships. There's not a lot of RA ships in rhetoric. So I think in terms of disparities, especially some of the humanities disciplines would kind of suffer if all of a sudden, you know, RA ships were able to be paid more at the same level as someone who's on a TA ship. And again, this valuing research over teaching, I think is worth thinking about a bit more. And also, yes, we should probably just pay all graduate students more. But just coming from a place where, you know, all of my colleagues were all teaching 2-2 loads, right? And we're instructors of record. And, you know, for someone who's on an RA ship to get paid more, I'm not sure how, you know, that valuation, are there situations where TAs could get paid more, right? So just some things to think about. Thanks.
So in answer to your question, yes, the department would be allowed to pay TAs more if they wanted to pay the TAs more as opposed to the RAs. This would be giving flexibility to the departments. So, but yeah. Jacek?
Hi, it's Jacek Garbuliński, Aerospace Engineering Department. And I totally support the giving the flexibility to raise the salaries for graduate students, because as we know, different positions and different laboratories, different TA positions will require different workload. They require different duties, responsibilities, and also I think that they require some form of like independence where you carry out this position. So that's why a flexibility for raising the salary would be very important, so that the departments can really acknowledge what certain students do and what others don't. And in my personal experience, it is that many of additional scholarships or grants are, as Kelsey said, only U.S. citizens can apply for them, and only this way some graduate students that do fantastic research can get better salaries. And then, as we know, it doesn't apply to foreign students, as for example, as I am. And so I would love to see an opportunity like this, so that the department can appreciate more the work that some students do in research or TAing, especially if the workload is high.
Great. Autumn.
Autumn Perky, GVPT. I have a few points that I want to bring up that I think are important. So one thing I encourage you all to do, we are an R1 university. Sit down with your GGS and ask what this means and how your time should be prioritized between teaching and research. You'll probably get a really blunt answer. That's expected. The flexibility aspect of this is that RAs, they are paid from different funds. They're paid from grant money, which means a lot of times if that grant money is just sitting there because say you need to do archival research and COVID's going on and we can't do archival research because we can't travel, that money's just sitting there depreciating when it could be used to pay an RA more. And then the third point I think ties into who was just speaking. I can't say your first name. I'm so sorry. I'm really bad with names. But the work overload aspect of that. So international students can't take work overloads, but if this flexibility was granted, they could be paid more regardless of not being able to take that work overload, which is really important when we're thinking about diversity. Thank you.
Alec.
Yeah, Alec Dennis, Business and Management, just kind of bringing up two different departments, like two different things approach. In the business school, we actually have one pay scale flat for literally everyone, regardless of any circumstances. If you're TAing, GAing, RAing, there's no bump after your first year, nothing like that. It is entirely, everyone gets the exact same thing. So I just find it interesting how there are some of these other departments and other programs that do have such variance in things. And then my wife is in art history as a PhD student there. And in her case, often there is actually some, splits when you come in where certain people get, in order to try to pull them in, get offered a better pay package. That might be in part through extra fellowships or extra grants. And so it's one of those things where that sort of differentiation can already occurs a little bit. And this would just kind of make it a little bit more official in terms of how there can be this, how, some people can make more because of their background. And if the University of Maryland really wants to have, a particular graduate student, then they might offer them a better deal. Now, whether we want to make that easier is an entirely separate question, but it does kind of happen already.
Excellent. Thanks everybody for your thoughts. We'll be sure to convey them when we get to the discussion of that at the graduate council meeting. Lots of good things to think about. So this seems like a good point for me to pass running the meeting over to President Laffin. I have to go do some of my TA responsibilities and teach kids about polarization. Yeah, I'll just turn it over to President Laffin to run the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you, Vice President Chief. So no shift in policy or anything. We'll just continue forum until there are no things left to discuss in forum. So if you have any issues you want to raise or further comments on what we were just chatting about, please raise your hand and we'll start with Tamara.
Maybe that's my hand.
Hi, I'm Tamara Allertsyke. So I actually have a somewhat tangential conversation to start about overload TA ships. Maybe that's why Autumn also had her hand up. this is a conversation Autumn and I have been having. So something that I've experienced the last 2 semesters is I noticed I've been offered overload TA shifts. And that's excellent for me, right? Great. Fortunate thing is I really can't take them and I probably don't need them as much as some other students. So for example, here we mentioned students who are caretakers who might need overload TA shifts more just to support their families. And so I actually reached out to my department and I asked, how do you assign overload TA shifts? How do you offer overload TA shifts? And basically I got some answer about how it has to do with, fit and, who's going to be best for teaching the class. Interest was another thing, like, are you interested in this class? But there was nothing in there about need, like who needs an overload TA shift in order to be able to support themselves for financial reasons. And so I was wondering if it would be something that would be valuable for this body to approach, talking about asking the university to set some guidelines about need in terms of overload TA shifts or overload RA shifts or GA shifts in general. Thoughts?
Autumn.
Autumn Perky, GPPT. This was the exact thing I was going to bring up. Thank you, Tamara. I think a point to bring up is that it's an issue of equity. So that's one aspect. The skill aspect is what they're going to come back with and say certain people are designed for certain jobs. But there's also the issue of transparency. Like, how do we know these overloads exist? Like, could departments maybe post these are the overloads that are open this semester when those are open so people could apply rather than being specially selected? And I think that's the important point, is that there's an issue of transparency that we could address that also accounts for the skills and equity issue. Thank you.
Laura.
Laura McBride, chemistry. I was just looking at the chat, and based off of what some other people have said, it might be good to kind of get a little bit of information of, if like you're a TA in your department, what's your expected workload? Because based off of what Misty said, it sounded like in the comm department, you're supposed to teach 2 classes, the instructor of record as your TA ship for 20 hours a week. Where in the chem department, you're a discussion leader. So you're not even in charge of the course. And then this brings me to like the whole collective bargaining, that if between departments, the expectations are so different, then that's a problem. And, for an assistantship, you're only supposed to work 20 hours a week. So they should not be giving you assignments and expect you to do more than that. That's not what you're paid for. And so I feel like maybe GSG is a good place, and maybe someone in, I don't know, academic affairs committee or another committee could maybe spearhead this and try to find like, what are the expectations as a TA in your departments? And then we can see how they really vary. And then this could help us kind of address these equity issues across the university.
Hader.
This is my first meeting, so I don't know how this is supposed to go, but my fellow finance students and other students in some other programs that I'm friends with have been telling me that the undergrads are getting the option to take 7 courses pass fail, and the graduate students haven't been given any kind of choice. So I was wondering if this is the place to bring that up, if we can try to get the graduate students a choice as well, because a lot of people have been hurt by the virus. Even in this semester, a lot of people are struggling with even taking 2 classes. And this not only impacts their GPA, but also their ability to stay in the programs. And some of the students are international students. And if they are given probation or are kicked out of the program, they have to leave the country as well. I was wondering if it's possible to get graduate students the option to choose pass-fail.
So yes and no. I have a lot of context on that, and in a minute, I'll circle back and explain. But I think Tamara and Alec, are your hands about the previous conversation we were just having?
Yeah, mine was about that.
Mine was about that, but I can also speak to this because I feel like I've played a role a little bit in this.
All right, I'll start with Alec then, and then Tamara, you can do both yours and you'll transition us.
Sure. I would Pardon me. I was just going to add that, this problem with like varying expectations and not necessarily having varying pay does happen in the business school as well. Like specifically, I'm an instructor of record this semester for a class, and nothing else about my stipend or expectations changed. I'm still a GA ship. I'm still getting paid the exact same I was before. I still have the RA responsibility, the research responsibilities. The only difference is, now I also have a class that I have to run in addition to it. They get around this because in our offer letter they say twice during your thing you'll be expected to be an instructor of record for a class at some point, and that's just factored into the overhead. But I definitely can see how this sort of lack of fairness can pop up across departments. It's not just not just one or two departments. It can be most places.
Tamara, psych. So I guess to answer some of Laura's questions, because she had asked about, can we get some information on who is working overtime in these departments, who's getting like these overload, how much overload is being given out. And in short, there was a survey that was done. There's actually been 2 surveys that have tried to address this question. And in short, the response is it's really hard to get information on this because typically grad students don't fill out our surveys, which is really frustrating. So you have low turnout on these surveys in the first place, may not be very representative. And then in addition to that, I think that grad students, when they fill out these surveys, they have a tendency to be like, oh, well, I'm paid for 20 hours, and they put 20 hours in. And so if they're being asked to work over their 20 hours, like I know, for example, I have worked overtime, a lot, but I would probably also, before joining GSG, I might have just said 20 hours. If you're talking about overload TA shifts, that we don't have as much information on. And that is something that maybe we can address with the pull list survey. And so that's something that, the academic affairs, we can put that under our section of the pull list survey. Have you been offered overload before? I guess that also brings up another question for Misty about whether or not we're going to collect general demographics on the people who are taking the POLA survey, like their year, their department, if they're a TA or an RA, things like that.
Just to clarify, Tamara, thank you. I wasn't necessarily interested in who's been offered an overload TA-ship. My concern was between departments, what are the expectations just for a single TA-ship? What are you expected to do?
Yeah.
Because it seems like just from the little bit we've been talking about, at least between the comm department and chemistry, it's very different. And I would feel like the comm department spends way more time on a TA-ship than someone in the chemistry department does. And so just like, what are the basic expectations? And then why is that so different? Because if some departments are expecting their students on a TA-ship to do so much more than another department, that's not fair and that shouldn't be right. And then if their base TA-ship assignment is more than 20 hours, that's also not right. And I have been looking at the chat and I understand why responses are so low, because as a grad student, you don't necessarily want to complain to a professor who's doing research for the graduate school that like you're working more than 20 hours on average, or you think like your assignments aren't fair. So I get why we don't necessarily have this information, but probably everyone on this call, or not necessarily everyone, but a lot of us have been TAs at some point and we know kind of what the expectations are. So we have a general idea for our departments, and maybe we could just collect the information from ourselves to kind of get that, just so we sort of see what it is.
Should that be like a Google Doc where we can all kind of just go in and enter the general expectations?
Yeah, that probably could work.
Jack has information on this. Okay.
Cool. Valerie.
In my experience in my department personally, TA-ships really vary by course to course, and the responsibilities vary by course to course. So there are some semesters where I'm sure I'm doing under 20 hours a week, and there are other semesters where I'm doing way over because it just takes that long to grade 170 papers. So, and I was instructor of record once. I'm sure I worked way more than 20 hours a week when I was doing that. But then that comes back to this question around differential pay as well, I would think. In terms of the overloads, I guess my question would be how that works from department to department, because while I appreciate the concerns around transparency and inclusion and making sure that the distribution of those overloads is equitable, in my department, the people who are offered the overloads are offered them because, for example, their advisor has a grant or a fellowship, and that's where the funding for the overload is coming from. So, and again, there's a question about expected skill levels around that as well. So I don't know if that's how it works across departments or if there are possibilities for general overloads that would be like to assist in the office or things like that. But in my experience, those overload offers have been specifically tied to PIs and grants.
Autumn.
Autumn Perky, GBBT. So I see two issues going on right now that are really important that I think we can address and we can move forward with and work on. Tamara, I think we can work on this resolution about overloads and what we want to include on that. And if anybody wants to be involved on that, we would appreciate the help. And then Laura brought up a really good point about expectations. Like I know in my department, there is a form we're supposed to file and like send it with, it's kept with our administrative person in the office. And I think we could make a resolution and say that, you know, departments need to keep these on files as a first step to this issue. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know what you guys' thoughts are, but I think we have these two issues that we can address and we should look at means to achieve, like to deal with these problems. Thank you.
Misty.
Hi, I just wanted to answer Tamara's question. So Polis is not set up in a way that would be able to collect all of the data points that you were asking about. And, you know, I do remember this survey that's being talked about. And, you know, I am of the personal mindset that I don't need to be quantified in a survey for someone to understand that there is a problem that exists in terms of graduate student pay and equity. And so, you know, I just think that, I mean, maybe it just goes back to kind of, we need to, you know, get the right to collectively bargain or kind of whatever that solution is. But, you know, I just kind of I'm one to resist the urge that we need to send out a survey. And because I remember when the survey came out, it took like an hour or it was like not an easy survey to take. And I had graduate students in my department that were like, the survey is stressing me out. Like it's the irony of like, they're trying to help us. And in the process of asking us all these super detailed questions and having us keep a time diary and do all these things, like it's making the situation worse. So I don't know, those are just kind of answering Tamara's questions about Polis and then also trying to give some language around like, if I get one more survey, like I've gotten 2 surveys this week, I think about IT things, and it just, you know, anyways. That's like kind of like a personal issue, I realized, but I just kind of wanted to share that, or like, can we come up with other things other than surveys that might help us like communicate that there is a problem that needs to be solved. So I'll stop talking now.
Tamara.
So Misty, I 100% hear what you're saying. And I also was beating my head against the table when I was filling out that survey. Like, why the heck are there so many comment boxes? That said, I will say with the collective bargaining issue, survey data has been really helpful in making our argument. And getting like just general information and statistics on graduate students, like unfortunately lawmakers and legislators, they want to see numbers. Like, and I agree with you, like they should hear a testimony that is obviously a student struggling and think, oh, we should do something about this, but they want to know that everyone's struggling. Because, you know, they can't do anything unless it's widespread. So I think there is value in survey data. I agree that we should find a different solution though. And I think one solution that was already brought up is we take on this responsibility as graduate student government. Again, it took me one email that I sent to the person who works in the office and knows about overload TA shifts for me to find out what our, you know, department policies were for overload TA shifts. It's one email. And so I think, again, that's like one option for us to do instead of putting this on our constituents, is us ourselves take on the load. I also wanted, sorry, I remembered, I wanted to answer one of Valerie's questions because she had brought up a good point about how, you know, there are some GA ships that like overloads that cannot be offered to everyone. And I agree, right? Like if my advisor came to me and was like, I have this overload of research for you to do on brain data, like I couldn't offer this to Autumn, unfortunately. And so I think that it's important to point out, and something to keep in mind when we're writing this, is that I think our goal should be just making sure it's an inclusion criteria. So when you have a general TA ship or RA ship or GA ship that could be offered to anyone in the department. So for example, we have a stats course, right, that was offered to me as an overload TA ship because I was interested in it, not because I needed it. That's something that should probably be sent out to the whole department. So we have this overload, you know, these are the, you know, if you need it, just to make sure that we're getting more equity in this process.
Sorry, I was Jacek.
Jacek Garbuliński, Aerospace Engineering Department. I see one issue here that will concern international students. So students on J1 visas and F1 visas, they are usually they are not expected to work more than 20 hours a week, so that they can focus on their you know, so that they can focus on their course load, on studying, and etc. And I'm just afraid that at one point it might be that at departments where international students are many times in majority, it might be that the professor will be more happy to choose an international student rather than a US citizens, because international students will do the same work in 20 hours, or like in more than 20 hours, and they wouldn't be able to ask for overload hours. So that is just one issue that I see here.
Thank you. Daniel.
I have a point about a different topic, so I can just go later.
All right, then we'll go to Autumn.
In response with the international issue, Autumn Perky, GVPT, I think there's this real thing of what can we achieve? And there's an institutional level where we can try to make a difference. And then there's this federal visa level that is a little beyond what we can even try to handle, because that's not within our preview. That's just not something that we can try to change. So it's like, you have to take small bites of the cake as you can and take what you can get for now, and then keep these issues in mind and how can we address them later? And so I feel sympathy for that, and it annoys me, but I'm like, I'm not a politician right now. Thank you.
Tamara.
I also just wanted to respond to what you said, Jacek. It's really heartbreaking to me, and every single time I hear about some of these international student issues, I get more and more angry. And I want to be an ally, but unfortunately with these overload credits, like if they're offering like an overload credit right now, like what we're suggesting wouldn't change that, right? Like if they're asking international students to do work in 20 hours that they can't do in 20 hours, this resolution isn't going to make that worse or better. You know, if it's something the department is choosing, which probably should be done, is there should be a resolution that prevents departments from assigning work to international students that could be considered enough to be a separate assistantship. And I think that there probably already are some institutional policies that are in place. Whether or not departments are actually sticking to those might be the issue. I hope I guess cleared some of that up for you. If you have questions, I'll happily answer.
Jason.
Yeah, I totally understand it. I think my concern was even like more about domestic students rather than international students, because upon introducing like overload hours, it just the professor might shift to international students because they don't have as many rights as the domestic students. And I think the point is that we that I want to make is that we really need to be careful not to introduce any discrimination, and it's actually quite interesting, because here we can introduce discrimination against the domestic students rather than international students at some departments.
Autumn Perky, GVBT. So I think I'm seeing a third issue, because I've already mentioned to you guys we should do 2 things. So hopefully you guys are on board. I will try to work on these. I'm a little slow. You guys know that because I'm always busy. But I think maybe if we could get someone from the International Affairs Committee and maybe send it to them to address this issue, because it seems like an issue for the International Affairs Committee, that maybe they could start working on something and how we should address this. Thank you.
Tamara.
I hate to say this, but should this also be something that the Legislative Action Committee should be working on? Like, do we want to go and like approach like the international, like the visa system in the United States? I will actually say, just like on this note, something that I heard about recently that was kind of heartening. I am taking a policy course, and we got to listen to John Holdren speak. He came and talked to our class the other day, and he was talking about a really popular policy that I guess was shot down last time there was like the whole policy was shot down last time there was like immigration reform. We all know this. But the new immigration reform bill might also include this stipulation, which is that any student who has a STEM degree or graduates with a STEM degree in the United States will have a green card stapled to their STEM degree. And so that is something that hopefully we can look forward to. It's a really popular policy, apparently, very bipartisan support. So.
Aaron.
Aaron Rock, computer science. I'm actually in that same class as Tamara, and I actually had was thinking about that myself, and that I think that would be good, something that this body or one of the subcommittees could push for, and I would be happy to help with that effort to try to convince lawmakers to do that.
Do you see that in the chat, Tamara? Not to cut you out.
Let me read it. Give me 1 second.
It's just a request to repeat what you said about that policy.
Yeah. So initially, God, I can't remember when that initial immigration bill was proposed. You know, it was like a broad spectrum immigration reform bill. And one of the things that was attached to it to make it more popular was this policy I'm talking about, which would allow any student in the United States, any international student who graduated with a STEM related degree, to have a green card stapled to that degree. In other words, they would have a green card when they graduated with STEM degree. I already know there are going to be some, and maybe Aaron can like clear up some of the questions also, but I already can see that there are probably going to be some hesitations in supporting this policy from people who are not in STEM degrees. I fully support that. But I just want to like reiterate that this was broadly bipartisan. Like there were Republicans and Democrats who supported this across the aisle. And so it's a very popular policy, and I think it's something that we could easily put our voice behind.
Misty.
Hi, Misty Com. I just want to send out a reminder that's unrelated to this, although as you know, a rhetorician, yes, I am a humanities person, but I wasn't raising my hand to speak to that, Tamara. But I just wanted to somewhat ironically give a reminder that there is a anti-racism and diversity questionnaire, not a survey, that the Diversity and Inclusion Committee is hoping to have responses in by the end of today. So if you haven't submitted it on behalf of your department, so again, our goal is at least just one response that kind of represents what's happening in each department. Please work on getting that done today, because the committee will be meeting in the next 2 weeks to figure out what our next steps will be with the answers we get to those questions. So that was just my friendly reminder. That's all. Thanks.
Rob.
Just a question for Misty. Rob Delka, physics. What is the current like status of maybe how many people have filled it out? If you know, generally, if we're looking for responses from certain departments, that kind of thing?
So I looked at it, I want to say I looked at it yesterday, and there were 19 responses. And, you know, a question I had, does there exist an easy place where there's like a list of all the departments, or at least all the departments that are represented on graduate student government? Because I don't know, it's hard for me to gauge how many of the departments we're waiting to hear from, because I don't know who all has representation right now. I'm looking right now as well. But
And just as a second follow-up, was it individual responses or was it like collective responses that people worked on together?
okay, so I have actually it's only 16 responses, so I exaggerated by 3. And from what I remember, it's kind of a mix. There's a few individual responses and a few on behalf, like it's kind of a mix.
So to answer your question quickly, Misty, and then I'll go to you, Valerie. Your names are on the website, so you can see it lists you all under your departments. Then it also lists the departments that aren't represented. So
Okay.
you could do a quick count of the headers of all the departments. I think that's probably the quickest way.
Good, thanks, Daniel. That makes sense. Awesome.
Valerie.
Misty, was that 16 individual? You said some of it was departmental and some of it was individual. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm looking right now, but I remember when I glanced at it the other day, it seemed to be a mix of both, but I don't have the exact breakdown.
So for a collaborative response from a department, do you want us to fill out the survey based on a departmental response, or do you want us to submit something to you?
Yeah, use the form.
Okay.
Yeah, just use the form, and you can just, you know, it has a place where you put the name of the department or program. So.
Okay, I can submit something based on earlier conversations I've had, but frankly, I had a listening session and nobody showed up. So I will encourage them again to respond individually. Thank you for putting it together.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Daniel.
On a related note of surveys, I saw in the Diamondback recently, there was an article about how SGA is putting out a survey about housing. I was wondering if you know anything about that, Daniel, if GSG is doing something similar, or if that's something that maybe the committee I'm now ahead of could look into that.
Was that question for me, Daniel?
Yes.
Sorry,
I got
the first half again. I just got a private message in the chat and I was taken away.
Sorry. Yeah, just asking if GSG is collaborating with SGA on that at all, or if that's just the SGA initiative as of right now, as far as this housing survey.
So it's just SGA at the moment. I'm really happy to get involved with just about anything you all tell me you want me to do. So if you want me to, I can. I could also just put any of you in direct connection with the relevant SGA person. But yeah, that's where we're at.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. I have a couple other points. Specifically about the website. So I know legislation was finally posted there recently after like a year-long hiatus. I was wondering just more broadly, should we consider posting things other than like legislation, maybe stuff like minutes and agendas on the website? And also, do you think it's worth introducing some sort of a amendment to the bylaws to just enshrine more timely posting to the website?
So for start, I don't know if that question was for me, but I don't see a hand, so I'll take it. For starters, we can, absolutely add other quote unquote public documents to the website for ease of access and share. So minutes, agenda, and the like is pretty easy. I think I would just ask for a loose consensus and then Edie can go from there. An amendment also is probably pretty good to the bylaws, or just, to the bylaws, to make sure that is more expedient than I was with it. I apologize again for that. But yeah, in theory, it shouldn't be necessary, but I think it's always good to codify things because some things slip through the cracks, and obviously this one did up until 2 weeks ago or whenever it happened.
And can I add to that? Yeah, and for the minutes and for the attendance, we already have all of those things on the drive. And I believe every member of GSG has permission to the drive. If you don't have permission, I think your committee chair was responsible to add you to the drive. So we all have those things in the assembly folder, the assembly drive, so you can access all of them there.
Is that drive accessible to other students as well?
Yes, the public drive is for all graduate students. It has no permission.
Okay. Thanks.
Cool. Also, a quick reminder to include your 4-letter code on your name. We're doing attendance right now in the background, and we want to make sure that you're properly recorded. Tamara.
So since I don't know, it seems like we're kind of in a more open aspect of the forum, I did want to address, is it Hader? I'm not sure if I said your name right.
Yes,
I wanted to address
Heather.
I wanted to address your earlier question because I realized we didn't get to it. You had asked about graduate students getting satisfactory fail versus undergraduates who are now getting pass fail, and isn't being equally offered. So the graduate student government kind of last semester pushed for undergraduates to get the pass fail option, and we didn't push for graduate students to get satisfactory fail, and I'll tell you why. So our concern, or my concern, maybe I shouldn't speak for the whole body, was that undergraduates were really spending more time in office hours, kind of bogging down graduate teaching assistants, more time emailing about questions, being concerned about grades. I know I personally experienced this, and I heard personal testimonies from others here that were experiencing similar things. And we felt it would alleviate some of the load on graduate assistants if undergraduates were able to have this pass-fail option. We also knew that undergraduates were pushing really hard for this. We weren't hearing the same push from graduate students about satisfactory fail. And I don't think that this, like, getting graduate students satisfactory fail would, I guess, alleviate the problems that you brought up about being put on academic probation as a graduate student, because the way that the system has essentially been placed now, or the way it is now, is for undergraduate students, it is so that you get a pass if you're above a C, right? If you're like passing for, like, what would be considered passing as a letter grade, right? So if you're above a C, you get a pass. If you're below a C, you get a fail. And that's the way it works. And so for graduate students, we care, I'm there, again, speaking for myself, I think we care less about what grades we get. We care more about just passing our classes. Whereas for undergraduates, their bigger concern is I need an A, or like I need this not to hurt my GPA because I want to go to graduate school, or because, I want to get this award, or I want to get this scholarship, or, on and on and on and on. Especially in my department in neuroscience, like in the neuroscience area, this was like a huge issue. I had medical students and students who wanted to go to graduate school for psychology who were very concerned about their grade. And so I just don't think the same issue that's affecting graduate students. And if they did do a satisfactory fail and they put the satisfactory at a B or B minus, and then the fail at below a B minus, this isn't going to affect who's going to be on academic probation or not. Because it's just going to be the difference of getting a B or B plus, or a satisfactory, or a B minus and a fail. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. But my concern is that even though people think that a B minus is all right, but you need a 3.0 to stay in the program itself. And if you get B minuses for all class, you're out of the program altogether. But if you have the choice to get satisfactory with a B minus and it doesn't impact your GPA, it allows people to stay in the program and continue with their studies rather than just get kicked out.
So that's different from, I guess, like the way I was looking at it from before. Like in my department, like you are not allowed, I think B is the cutoff. You can't get more than one B minus. Like you get one B minus and you go on probation. And then if you get another one, then you get kicked out. It's not just the GPA cutoff. But if there is a concern with the GPA cutoff, then maybe this is something we should approach.
Autumn, GVPT. So I think you guys are bringing a key point, but I think we're going to see departmental variation. So they have to meet the graduate school standards and what the graduate school says. But I think with the GPA, and I've discussed this with my DGS at one point in time because I suck at stats. I don't know how you all survive the stats course. They're painful. And basically what he said is if we are performing poorly, like probation would be taken, but there'd be actions taken to keep you in the program, or there'd be a discussion about whether or not you should master out. And I don't know if that's the official standpoint, but I think we're going to see a lot of variation between departments and how they handle this issue and what it looks like. Is it just a bad grade that's a singular case and they're doing really well in research, or is this like against the graduate school, or what does it look like? So I just think the context is important here.
I also have like a question, is the satisfactory, so I know for pass fail, it doesn't affect your GPA in the same way, right? Is that the same thing for satisfactory fail? Or if you get a fail, is that going to negative, like is that going to really impact your GPA also?
So my understanding, and then probably Autumn will correct me when I get it wrong, is if you get a pass or a satisfactory, it does nothing. But if you fail in either, it is still counted as a fail, I think. Go ahead, Autumn.
Dan's correct. I don't know if you guys read the policy in the spring intensively, because I sure did, because I was in stats. And if you got an F or below the cutoff point that they gave us, that would affect your GPA and you would take the F. So yeah, the positive doesn't help. The negative negatively impacts you.
So I guess like to my original point, like I don't know if this is going to help graduate students in the same way it would undergraduate students. Like I don't think it'll fix the problem that you're explaining. If it's a problem though, we can talk about different solutions.
Got it. Thank you.
Don't see other hands at the moment. Laura, I'm gonna see if I can find that email because for whatever reason I'm blanking on the content of it at the moment.
Say I can copy and paste the paragraph into chat. It's pretty long though, but I can put it there for people to read.
Thank you. I have a question. How do people get on the committees? Because I actually have no idea how the student government works for the graduate students.
Good question. So at the beginning of the year, we solicited basically interest preferences from everybody, and then assigned the committees, or Simon assigned the committees as basically as best we could. And some people got more than one if they were willing. At this point, since most people are assigned, if you're not on a committee, / if you want to be added to another committee, you can always be on more than one. I would have you reach out to Gianna. Gianna Howard is our chief of staff, who is still on the call. Gianna, can you throw your email in the chat? And then she'll just probably give you the list. Even better. All right, Gianna's going to email the whole assembly about it. And then we'll go from there. Oh, all right, Laura, thank you. I was like, I don't remember writing an email about this. That was a copy paste from University Senate. And that was the justification that the Senate had for approving pass fail for undergrads at 7 credits and leaving the graduate structure as it is. Okay, feel way better. I thought I literally just blanked on a whole.
Okay, thank you. So I think that might address maybe the concerns that were brought up about why grad students didn't get it. So I just wanted to include that.
Tamara.
I also just wanted to add, after reading Laura's comments, which were brilliant and stated very well, that someone had brought up to me that one concern was that some departments need to have actual GPA, like they need to have letter grades in order to get certification. So, for programs like engineering, for example, where, like they need to have a certified degree first to match whatever requirements are needed. So that's where it also affects like your graduate progress also differently versus undergraduate students. Or I didn't even think about psychology is like another really good example, because we have students who are also working on basically becoming practitioners.
All right, we have 30-ish minute, 28 minutes to go, and we'll go to Autumn.
Okay, I have a secondary point if no one else has their hand point up. Is that okay? Okay, so Dan, can I post the survey from the Title IX Advisory Board that they wanted asked? I sent it to Simon last night and asked him to send it out, but it's probably buried in his inbox, so I was just going to share it in the chat if that's appropriate.
Sure, go for it. Seeing no hands at the moment, I'll give you a couple other updates from GSG leadership. So as we've referenced a few times, the graduate school leadership and the graduate student government leadership met yesterday. And some of the things that we chatted about has already been covered, but some have not. So I want to give you a couple of updates as to where those conversations are. For starters, there was an issue raised that some departments were sharing information about vaccine distribution that wasn't perfectly accurate. Not that it was intentionally misleading, but they had missed the incorrect information. Dean Fetter is going to reach out to the health center directly to get kind of uniform information shared to graduate students. So that should hopefully supersede departmental communications. My understanding is that departmental communications about vaccines will cease because why are they the ones communicating vaccines in the first place? There's that. There was GSG is hoping, so for those of you who are new this year, you might not know that in previous years, we run a shuttle from Dulles Airport to help international students that are coming in to the country. It also can be used by people flying in from across the country, but it's more tailored to international students. Obviously, we had to not do that this past academic year because of the pandemic, but we're looking at instituting it in August, all things willing. The graduate school is a partner in that in the past, and they will be again, financially that is. So that's cool, good news there. A couple of opportunities for you all, and then me if nobody does it. There is a teaching pavilion plan by the farm on campus, and anytime there's a site selection committee, a graduate student has to serve on it. So Dean Fetter has reached out to me to reach out to all of you to see if anyone wants to sit on that committee. It cannot be anyone from the agricultural school because there's a guideline where you can't serve on a site selection committee if the thing being developed benefits you or your program because you're supposed to be neutral about it. So sorry about that. But if you're not from that program and you want to learn more about that or you want to sit on the committee, let me know and we'll move forward. We're hoping
And could you say what it's for again?
Yeah, so
Selection of what?
There's a new teaching pavilion being developed by the farm. And so anytime there's a site selection committee for building development or anything along those lines, there's a selection of people, and one of the categories is a graduate student. Secondly, and last, was that a question about that, Tamara?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what is expected of a graduate student sitting on a committee like this?
Yeah, good. So it's pretty minimal, from my understanding. It's like 2 or 3 meetings. Basically, you just put input kind of on what you think is and isn't reasonable. I honestly don't even know if there's like a formal vote process, and if we would or wouldn't have a vote. It might just be more of an advisory committee capacity. But yeah, it is not a major commitment. Speaking of non-major commitments as far as how often you meet, but this one is major in its importance. As we've referenced a few times, the Graduate Council has graduate members on it. Wouldn't you know? One of which is the president, just by default, but others are appointed graduate students. Nancy is, if she's still on the call, she is on the call, but also if she wasn't on the call, is one of the graduate students that serve on it. So shout out Nancy. Dean Feder is looking for graduate students to serve on it next year. So if you're planning on returning to GSG, or you're not, sad, but you're planning on still being related to graduate issues and you want to serve on the council, let me know, because we can get you placed on there kind of in the early rounds of placements. It's a maximum of 5, I believe. Again, one of which is the president, one of which is the VPLA. 3 of which are students. You might be questioning, what does this council do? The council is the direct advisory board to the dean and the graduate school in general. So every month or so, they convene and discuss any kind of potential policies that would affect graduate school programs. So like we chatted about that funding, that new funding structure, that comes from the council first before really it goes anywhere else for the most part. It's you kind of get more information than really anybody else on a first pass. So yeah, it's basically whatever is pertinent at the time. You also, as a member, have the opportunity to add things to the agenda if you want to. You can reach out to Dean Feder or Dean Feder's office and get it added if it's deemed relevant. All right, cool. That's it from me. So I'll look for any more hands. We also can convene early, not that I'm recommending or motivating you all to do that, but we don't have to sit here in silence until 2 if people feel satisfied. Autumn.
Hi, Dan. Did you want me to share the email that GAC received in response to whether or not graduate students should be receiving the vaccine if they're on campus?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be very helpful. Yeah, so Rob just asked and Nancy answered in the chat, but if you're not looking, the council is mostly faculty and staff with student representation on it. I do have another thing. I promise I'm coming up with all of these on my own, and I'm definitely not getting reminders by direct messages. Tamara, is that about, before I move on again?
It was about the vaccine.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll do mine after.
Okay, so I guess I'm reading this, and I need some clarification here because it says that graduate students who work on campus. Does that actually mean graduate students who work on campus, or does that mean that graduate students that have been labeled as essential? Because I know for a fact that I work on campus, like I do go on campus to work, but at the same time, I'm not considered essential because I work with human subjects. I'm not sure how that makes sense to the university, but I'd love some clarity on that.
I don't want to misrepresent it, so I'll defer to Autumn. You have your hand, so I'll go to you either way. And then Edie, I saw your comment. I'll come to you after.
So this is the response GAC was given after we sent in all the testimony for everyone. I'm drafting the response for GAC. So if you guys have strong opinions that you would like included, please send them to my email address and I will include them in the drafted letter. GAC has strong opinions about how this seems a questionable response to a very delicate issue. And that's the way I will phrase this. And I will pass it back to Dan.
And I will toss it to Edie, who technically doesn't have his hand raised, but does in the sense of order of going.
Hi, so I want to talk about grad. So the update we have now is that we have good amount of people registered for grad, considering the pandemic. And I think that's like a progress on our side, because at this time last year we didn't have like this number of people registered for grad. Our plan was to have at least 50 or above, but that's why we had it for 3 days. But right now we have like under 30 people registered. Hopefully that number grows between now and the 22nd, which is the last day to register. So I think you'll receive an email this weekend or early next week to just continue to like share it with your constituent to register for grad. We're gonna give like a grand award for the winner. Right now we have it for $500 for the winner, and then $300 for the second, and then the last person that is gonna be $100. So please just share this information with your constituent, and also if you have like your your professors that you're close with, just you can ask them if they want to join the judging team to judge grad. We greatly appreciate that. But so far so good. We are progressing. Hopefully we have more people registered before 22nd, and then we have more judges sign up. And also right now, because we don't have a total number of people registered yet, so we don't know the size of volunteers that we need, but please just watch out. Probably after the 22nd, when we know the total amount of people registered, we're going to ask for volunteers to help with packing up bags of swag, to mail to participants, and also to help us with managing Zoom room. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. All right, I saw hands and now I don't see hands. Kelsey.
Hi, I will tell you, I have not gotten the vaccine, but I am essential and I'm on a wait list. And the way it works is you register with the county. And when you register, it'll ask you if you are like a frontline worker. And when you say no, a new question will pop up that says, are you involved in the education center or sector? And you say yes. And that is all the information that you need to provide to get, like, I guess, on the phase 1B waitlist, which I am on now, and you will all, I guess, end up on if you do it right now. But like Yehuda has said in the chat, they don't seem to do any verification. So be honest with yourself if you need to register. But I don't think anyone actually checks.
Yeah. Can I clarify that? Yehuda Katz, computer science. So there are some places that are checking, and even if you show up with, as much documentation and ID cards and anything else, they will sometimes turn you away because they feel like it. So the only thing you can do is register everywhere. I personally got the vaccine at Safeway, and I brought in a big pile of documentation, and they said, we don't care. You said that you're eligible, we'll give it to you. So, just sign up every single place you possibly can. And if you don't need it and you are okay, and you're not going to see anyone or anything, if you honestly think that you don't qualify, then don't jump the line. But if you do qualify, honestly, then do whatever you can to get online, and you'll get there eventually.
Autumn, GPBT. I think Yehuda brings up a good point, and that's what we were actually seeing, is that graduate students were getting turned away from the University Health Center and like on campus getting turned away from getting the vaccine who were actually working there, which is a big problem. And then I wanted to bring up, yes, Kushbu, I know I need a vaccine because I'm immune compromised and immune deficient. I can't even leave my house anymore because I get pneumonia usually twice a year. So I'm like suffering immensely. And I'm pissed about this for all you and for myself, clearly. And then Edie, I wanted to bring up a point with the research thing, that a way that you might be able to get more respondents is if you open it up to research designs as well, which the way I read the site, it didn't seem like research designs were accepted, which would get more people to come to present. Thank you.
Thank you. Tamara.
So I guess my point is to follow up on what Yehuda and Kelsey had both said. I have, I guess, responses to both of them. So to Kelsey, I actually did fill out that survey, and I still don't understand how, like, if you're not, I think it said essential worker, like, are you essential? And on the University of Maryland campus, you are not considered essential unless they gave you a letter at the beginning of the pandemic saying you were essential. And this was essentially handed out to people who were not working with human subjects. After that point, they opened it up to human subjects research when the pandemic was, I guess, going through a lull. However, there haven't been any updates to that policy, even though we've now seen 2 peaks since then. And people are still working with human subjects, yet we're not considered essential. And so it's a little frustrating to me because I feel like, how are they supposed to, like, I don't think I qualify because I'm not considered essential, but I am working on campus. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? How like this is like kind of backing some students into a corner? And then I guess you, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't know anything about that because I work with animals and I've had a letter. I've been like carrying around a letter just in case a cop is like, are you essential? Should you be here? So I don't know anything about humans. Sorry.
If your advisor writes you a letter on letterhead, that's going to be sufficient too. No one giving vaccines knows the difference between the letter from the provost and the letter from your department or a letter from your advisor, as long as it looks official. And as long as you read the rules and honestly say you qualify.
Okay. I guess my other question is, when you fill out that survey, like, do you say yes to the first response or no? Do you just say yes to the second response?
I think the first one is like, are you, I don't remember the wording exactly, but I thought I read it as like, are you literally working in a hospital type situation? So I said no to the first one.
It depends which surveys you're filling out. As I said, apply everywhere you possibly can, and every single survey asks it in a slightly different way. So you have to read it really carefully and just answer as best as you can. And that you can't do worse than that.
Can I actually ask, so I've only seen one survey and that was from PG County. What other surveys are out there? Are you actually like applying to get an appointment at places? What's happening? Sorry, Henry wants to be a member also.
Yeah, if you go to Safeway's website or you go to Giant's website, they each have their own signups. So I signed up with my doctor's office, and I signed up with Montgomery General Hospital, and I signed up with I live in Montgomery County, so I signed up there. So you can sign up, find every single place you can.
Okay. And then I also just wanted to like comment briefly on whether or not they're looking at a documentation. And my understanding from the people I know who have gotten it is that they are, and that pay stubs have worked in most cases. So.
Yeah, as I said, so my mother is a grade school teacher, and she was turned away, and she had all the documentation and everything, and they just turned her away anyway. And as I said, when I went to Safeway, they didn't want to see anything. They said, if you're here, we assume that you are qualified. So there's really no way to know.
Misty, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to, if people look and check the chat function, I put the link to the Maryland State Vaccination website, which is kind of the clearinghouse website, which both always announces at the top when Six Flags or other mass vaccination sites have open appointments. But also if you put in the zip code and do find a vaccination site, it gives you a map with a list. And as you go down, all the ones where you can check for appointments or register for appointments are listed separately. So I recommend checking this website regularly, as well as going through find a vaccination site and just going through all the links until you've exhausted registering for the different options that are available, because it is a very ad hoc process, as Yehuda has suggested. But I think this website is the best website that gets you to all the potential things in addition to the registration that you might have done with PG County.
Thank you, Missy. Thank you, all of you. That's super helpful information. As essential as I like to consider myself, I am nowhere on any of these lists, so I'm gonna hold myself off for the time being, but I encourage all of you, if you're doing anything in person, definitely, as Yehuda recommended, be as aggressive as possible. Couple of notes, housekeeping and other announcements. For starters, I will once again feel like that Bernie Sanders meme where he's like, I'm once again asking for financial, whatever. I'm once again recommending that you run for GSG leadership if you're planning on returning to your programs or returning to GSG. Today was a really good case study of all the issues you can cover and how invested and involved you can be. So if you're considering presidency, VPLA, VPFA, Director of Operations, let me know, let us know. Chief of Staff and our new Director of Public Relations are hired in the fall, so you wouldn't go for those right now. But if you're interested in those 4 I mentioned, please let us know so we can get the ball rolling. And if you want to just meet one-on-one or in a group to chat about what it takes and what level of insanity is required to run for president, as is being suggested in a direct message, we can totally do that. We can schedule one-on-one hangout. Also, next, for new members, this assembly, typical in structure, not typical in distribution. A typical assembly will have our opening comments, whatever. We have a guest speaker more often than not. Our guest speaker in March, by the way, is going to be Dr. Prillo again. I invited her back because it seemed that she was pretty well received in the fall and she requested to return. So I was like, sure. So she'll be here in March. That's usually about the first 20 to 30 minutes. Typically, it's about an hour of business, old and new business, like that legislation we went through. There's usually more than one. And then the last half hour or so is this rep forum. This is the longest rep forum I've ever seen in my 1 year. But those range in length and in content, obviously. Yehuda.
As the longest ever serving graduate student government representative, I can tell you that in almost every GSG meeting that I've been at, representatives forum has not happened because the business just goes on so long. So it is nice to switch it around. And it really depends on whether people are if you've done your research before you submit a resolution, then it usually goes through pretty quickly. If there are controversial resolutions that can take, the rules committee will put them in for 10 minutes and they'll take an hour and 10 minutes or 2 hours and 10 minutes. It's happened. So this is definitely not typical, but it's good to have everyone talk once in a while.
Agreed. Thank you, Yehuda. My last announcement, depending on how closely you monitor your emails, you already know this. I have been selected placed on the Provost Selection Committee. Former Provost Rankin is stepping down and they're selecting a new one. A couple of you have already reached out to me, so thank you for that. I haven't responded because I'm bad at email. You've all learned this already. But I have seen your comments and it's super helpful to have some of the prior context going into the space. So if you have thoughts on what would make a good provost, who would make a good provost, who wouldn't make a good provost, I welcome all of that. I want to represent the graduate voice kind of in its entirety, as I always seek to do. Beyond that, I actually don't know much. I haven't received any communication as to when we're meeting, how it's structured, timeline, etc. I obviously will communicate that with you when I know it and if I'm allowed to, which I assume I will be. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that before we wrapped up here. Are there any last comments, questions, issues in our last 5 minutes here? Thanks, Nancy. I'm going to take credit away from Simon and say that this is my meeting. I did this. Yehuda, go ahead.
So first, I saw a question in the chat about if you have questions about resolutions and how to write them, reach out to Simon or to the Rules Committee, who definitely want to help you in advance, as much in advance of a meeting as possible. And besides that, I have a motion to adjourn.
I've heard a motion to adjourn, so for your new members, we need this. And we also need a second.
Second.
You heard Arthur first, so in the minutes, we'll mark him. Sorry, everyone else. Is there any dissent? Do I ask for that? Oh, see, now my non-VPLA skills are showing.
You're the You're the chair, so you
Oh,
get
I'm
to
the chair.
decide what procedure you want to use.
So I won't even ask for dissent. We are adjourned. I'll stick around for a couple minutes if anyone has any off the record comments. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Great, however long until, International Town Hall is on Monday. Come watch university leadership and some of us answer some questions at the panel. Wish I had said that 10 seconds